Hey, that's me. This is around about when we do our final 5K erg test of the season, which is kind of the result of all of our time on the rowing machine over the last 6 months of training. The score we get on this test is the one that Coach Rob will have in his head when he selects the top 8 guys to race Oxford on March 30th. So even though this is my 3rd year at Cambridge, I still get nervous like a week out from this final test. So for this episode in the series, I thought I'd also sort of summarize how I approach an erg test like this in some sort of order of importance. These are going to be cliff notes though, because I could talk for hours on this topic. And all this stuff applies to any length of erg test or even fitness test really. But we focus on the 5K erg test because that's what matters for the boat race. And I'll show you my score at the end so you could judge if all this advice is worth listening to. So around a week out from the test, by far the most important thing is rest. And our coach Rob will start to taper off the mileage around about here, and we typically don't do any training at all in the 2 days before the test. Outside of training, obviously everyone's heard the importance of getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep, turning your phone off an hour before bed, making sure you get to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, which I usually am not great at following. But a week out from a big test like this, I try and really make sure I'm locked in on that kind of stuff. And the guys catch me napping all over the place. I mean, your sleep the actual night before the test isn't that important because you'll probably be really nervous and you won't sleep well. But it's important to bank it in the 2 or 3 nights before then. Also, I think it's important to try and ease off your work a little bit outside of the rowing, although that really isn't always possible with a PhD. But I do try and stay off my phone. Closer to test day, you want to be eating these big carby meals. So lots of potatoes, pasta, rice, bread, that sort of stuff. My first year of rowing, I was one of those guys who tried to track all their macros and I put everything into MyFitnessPal. But honestly, when you're eating like 6,000 or 7,000 calories a day, you typically can hit a protein target by literally eating just bread, which I do not recommend. So typically I just focus on getting in the right foods mostly and making sure I'm not starving myself, which is not a big problem I have anyway.
What did you eat for breakfast?
Then 2 days before the test, I'll generally at some point during the day go hop on the erg and I'll do 20 minutes of steady state and then 3 1-minute bursts and then maybe a couple of starts. And then usually I'll do something like a 1K on pace just to sort of get the rhythm and get the rate that I'm looking for.
Drive up to Cambridge 4, race part 9.
Pretty basic stuff. Then the day before the test, I'll do the same thing, but without the 1K at pace, so just sort of a race warm-up. And then I know some guys like to do a pre-paddle the day of the race, if the test is in the afternoon. And I mean, a bit of a sweat down definitely does help with test anxiety, but honestly, it's a little overkill, so I didn't do that this time. The night before the test, I like to write out a little bit of a race plan. I know some guys prefer to just kind of wing it or do it on the day, because honestly, I mean, 2 minutes into any erg test, I've totally forgotten my race plan. But I feel like at least the sort of visualization exercise of sitting down and thinking about the test to come is a good way of getting yourself in the right headspace and getting your body sort of ready to PB. And I mean, the actual race plan is always really simple. I mean, you basically want to get as close as you can to even split, but then you've got like 8 or 10 strokes at the start where you've got a little bit of that ATP and you want to go a little bit shorter and a little bit faster to kind of burn some of that off. And then it's psychologically easier to sort of move into a slightly faster split and then eventually the sprints at the end. Something I got from the erg king, Tom George, is how he likes to make this section of the race the slowest, and then just in tiny, tiny, tiny increments, you make every section following that a little bit faster, which means you sort of build a feeling of momentum and progress as the test goes on, which is really helpful for the mental game. So my actual race plan for this was to go 15:48, and I didn't sleep well at all that night. Now, I've put supplements last because supplements do not work. And I really wouldn't try anything in your first few years of rowing except maybe a strong cup of coffee, because the last thing you want is to feel like you need something stupid like 10 tablespoons of bicarb, or else you're not going to perform well in a test. And it's all placebo anyway. But I mean, I'm 6 years into rowing here, so at this stage I'm a big believer in the placebo effect, and I'll do anything it takes to take even 0.1 of a second off my erg scores. So for this specific test, I was taking beta-alanine starting about 6 weeks out, then beetroot juice the day before, and then also the morning of, and then 2 of these beta fuel gels, which is a terrible name for something that's basically just like a Red Bull, which means caffeine, taurine, and then a bit of carbs. Oh, Lord, it's race day. Oh, oh boy. First, I pray to God that this whole thing's just a dream. But he never listens. You start the day off with the safest possible breakfast, which for me is toast with butter and Bovril, not Marmite, with poached eggs, and beetroot juice. The house is weirdly quiet for a couple hours because no one knows what to do with themselves.
We're gonna die, Tom. We're gonna die.
And I spend that time generally picking out a banging playlist. Then eventually Seb comes downstairs and you file out the door one by one and you cycle down to Goldie where you meet all the guys and down the 2 beta fuels. Some guys like to listen to hype up music, but I kind of like to save the music for the actual test. Then you start stretching and going to the bathroom a couple times. And then eventually you hop on the ergs and you do your warm-up that you've practiced 2 or 3 times already at this point. And you can kind of feel all the caffeine kicking in. And that, along with all the nervousness, sort of makes your hands and your muscles all twitchy. And inevitably Coach Rob comes to the front. And you think, oh, I can't believe this is happening. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. And then he calls, attention. The start of the piece for me is just about executing the race plan. I mean, you've got so much nervous energy, you feel like you could go 1,000,000 miles an hour. This is where a lot of rookies will sometimes go way too hard and end up blowing on the test. Then you get a couple minutes in and it starts to hurt a little bit. You start thinking things like, oh, is it too early to hurt like this? Oh boy, here we go. And then you get to the halfway mark. And personally, I like to trick myself and say that the last 1 minute is free. So there actually isn't that much time left. Then you get closer to the planned sprint and it's hurting like hell. And there's way too much time left on that clock. And you're watching it tick down and you're thinking, there's no way I last the end here. And at this point, there was this massive rookie on my right side who'd been matching me stroke for stroke the whole way. And here we were absolutely dead level. And then you get into the last minutes and you start counting strokes of 5. And then you stop being able to make it to 5, so you start counting strokes of 3. And then you're counting strokes of 1. And then you drive up the rate using whatever muscles you have left that are still working. And then you basically hang on to as fast and as hard as you can go to the end. When you finish, the first thing there is relief that you get to stop. And then the lactic acid and the oxygen hits you so hard. So guys end up just sort of lying around on the floor and outside panting for sometimes up to an hour. I end up going 15:45, which is my lifetime best. Pretty cool. You can see I followed pretty close to the race plan. Although I managed a slightly faster sprint at the end to stay ahead of Tom Connor. Mad props to him. Honestly, most of the guys did well on this one. So once the guys came to, there was a little bit of chatting and celebrating, and then some goofing around. And then off to 5 guys to chat about what Coach Rob might think of all these scores, and how it might affect selection.